You ever find yourself thinking, if they miss me, why are they still gone? It's one of the most confusing parts of dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. Because when someone misses you, when they think about you, when you know they felt something real with you, it's natural to believe that those feelings should bring them back, that they should be enough to close the distance. But the hard truth is, missing you doesn't equal readiness. There are people who can feel the ache of your absence, who can lie awake thinking about you and still not come forward. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know what to do with that care. For someone with an avoidant style, closeness can feel dangerous. Connection can feel like entrapment. And when they begin to feel those old familiar longings rise to the surface, longing for your voice, your presence, the way you made them feel alive and seen, they also feel the very thing they've spent years trying to outrun: vulnerability. And vulnerability to them doesn't feel like love. It feels like risk. It feels like suffocation. It feels like getting pulled into something they're not sure they can handle. This is the mistake we make. We think emotional longing is the same as emotional readiness. But just because someone misses you doesn't mean they're equipped to love you in the way you deserve. The capacity to feel pain in your absence isn't the same as the capacity to be present in your life. And this is where we get caught. We start to believe that their missing us means they're on their way back, that it's only a matter of time before they show up at the door with a changed heart and a new set of tools. But very often they're not coming back. Not because you didn't mean something, you did, you do, but because they haven't yet figured out how to meet that meaning with action. It's safer to miss you in the silence of their own space than it is to actually show up and risk being seen again, risk being needed, risk having to navigate the messiness of intimacy. And when they do reach out, maybe through a vague text or a story reply or some passive little breadcrumb, it's not always because they're ready. It's often because their internal emotional pressure cooker hit boiling point and they just needed a small release, a little contact to ease the ache. But that doesn't mean they're prepared to do the real work of showing up. That's why when you hear from someone who's been distant, you can't immediately take that as a sign of progress. You have to look at what follows that moment of contact. Is there consistency? Is there emotional responsibility? Are they walking toward you with intention or just reaching out from the cave before retreating again? Here's the thing, people can love you and still not be ready for you. They can value you, miss you, even feel a powerful emotional bond with you and still stay away. And if we measure our worth by whether they come back, we start to live on a very unstable foundation, because now their inability to be present starts to feel like our unworthiness. Their silence becomes our shame. But it's not you. They are not staying away because you weren't enough. They're staying away because closeness feels overwhelming to them. Because love, to them, doesn't just come with joy. It comes with expectations, pressure, responsibility, and fear of failure. So they choose the safety of distance, where they can maintain control over their emotions. So what do? You stop taking their absence personally. You stop interpreting their silence as a verdict on your value. And you begin to understand that someone can feel something deeply, but still not be in a place to give you what you need. You start to look not just at whether someone misses you, but whether they're showing up, whether they're consistent, whether they're willing to work through discomfort instead of running from it. Because it's not the missing that defines love, it's what someone does with the missing that tells you everything. And if they're not ready, let them go. Let them miss you in the quiet corners of their own mind. Let them feel the weight of your absence, not as a punishment but as a natural consequence of not showing up. Because you don't need someone who misses you, you need someone who chooses you. It's one of the most disorienting feelings. You sense they care. Deep down, something tells you you're not just another person to them. Maybe it's in the way they looked at you, the way they opened up in rare moments, the way their energy shifted when they were around you. And yet they're gone, quiet, distant, and you're left thinking, if I mattered, how could they just disappear like that? Here's what I want you to understand. avoidants often love in silence. They don't stop feeling just because they stop showing. They may still think about you when a certain song comes on. They may go through old pictures. They may even feel a pang of regret when they see someone who reminds them of you. But instead of reaching out, instead of stepping into vulnerability, they retreat further into their mind. That's their safe place. That's where they can idealize you without the pressure of being known or expected to act. And that's the thing, they often prefer the fantasy over the reality. The version of you they can control in their thoughts is much less threatening than the version who might ask for emotional availability, who might challenge their independence, who might require real presence. So they love you in a vacuum, quietly, secretly, and tragically at a distance. They may even speak about you to their friends. Yeah, she was special, or he really understood me. And yet they make no move. Why? Because admitting they miss you or care about you is only one part of the equation. Acting on those feelings means opening themselves up to discomfort. And for someone who fears intimacy, that discomfort can feel unbearable. So instead they bury the emotion, or they romanticize the past while convincing themselves it couldn't work anyway. Sometimes they'll scroll through your social media. They might not like a post. They might not comment, but they're watching, quietly, not because they're playing games necessarily, but because that level of distance allows them to feel something without having to risk anything. It lets them dip into the warmth of your presence without ever stepping into the fire of emotional commitment. And it can make you feel crazy, like you're imagining things, because everything tells you they still care, but their behavior says otherwise. And the worst part, you might even start adjusting your own behavior to accommodate their silence. You become quieter, more passive, more patient, hoping that your stillness will coax them back out of hiding. But the truth is, when you engage in that dance, you begin shrinking to fit their fear. You start matching their silence instead of standing in your worth. You begin mistaking absence for mystery and reinterpreting avoidance as depth. And I want you to be honest with yourself. Is it really love if it only exists in the shadows? If someone truly values you, they won't just feel it in private. They'll fight their fear to express it. They'll rise above their wiring to show up, even if imperfectly. It's okay to acknowledge that someone might have cared, that their silence isn't proof they felt nothing. But it's also okay, more than okay, to require more than invisible affection. You deserve more than someone who loves you quietly. You deserve someone who loves you clearly. Let them romanticize you from afar, if they choose to. Let them remember you as someone who stirred something real in them. But don't let their silent admiration convince you to wait in limbo, because you are not a concept to be admired behind a screen, or a memory to be clung to when it's convenient. You are a real person, with real needs. And the kind of connection you're looking for requires more than quiet feelings. It requires courage. It requires presence. It requires action. Because love that hides in the shadows may be poetic, but it's not partnership. When someone disappears from your life, someone you had a deep connection with, it's tempting to believe that your absence must be causing them the same level of discomfort you're feeling. And in many cases, it is. But the hard thing to accept is that just because someone feels your absence doesn't mean they'll do anything about it. See, when someone with an avoidant attachment style misses you, they often internalize those feelings. They don't externalize them by reaching out, or taking initiative, or making a move to repair the connection. Instead, they reflect, they ruminate, they process on their own, in silence. And that's what can be so confusing, because you assume that emotional discomfort leads to action, that missing you naturally leads them back to you. But for avoidants, it doesn't always work that way. They don't operate from the same emotional script. When an avoidant feels pain from losing someone, that pain doesn't necessarily become a motivator to reconnect. Instead, it can make them dig their heels in even further. They may use your absence to justify their belief that closeness is dangerous, or that relationships inevitably lead to discomfort. So rather than move toward you to resolve the pain, they often double down on their avoidance to protect themselves from feeling it more deeply. They'll sit with their emotions, they'll distract themselves, they'll rationalize. They might tell themselves things like, "It's better this way," or "I'd only mess it up anyway," or even "They're probably better off without me." These are not always truths. They're defense mechanisms, mental narratives that help them manage the emotional cost of distance without actually challenging it. And here's the twist. Sometimes the more they miss you, the more they avoid you, because the feelings you stir up in them are intense. And instead of being drawn to that intensity, they fear it. They fear what it might require of them, what it might awaken in them, what it might mean about how much they'd have to show up. So rather than get pulled into that current, they anchor themselves in solitude. They convince themselves that it's safer not to reach out. That silence protects them from vulnerability. And for you, that can feel impossible to interpret. You might think, how could someone who felt something so real with me choose to stay away? And the answer is, it's not about you. It's about their threshold for emotional risk. Avoidants often fear that if they come back, they'll have to face things they're not ready for. The conversation, the expectations, the possibility of failure, the vulnerability of being fully seen again. Your absence might stir something deep in them, but they don't always know how to convert that stir into motion. It's like emotional paralysis. They feel the longing, they think about you, they might even fantasize about a version of life where things were easier, where they were braver, more open, but they don't translate those thoughts into steps toward reconnection. And that's where your power lies. Because when you realize that their silence isn't necessarily apathy, it's avoidance, you stop waiting for their feelings to pull them forward. You stop mistaking their reflection for readiness. You stop thinking their pain will become your resolution. Your absence might be a wake-up call for them. It might cause them to grow, to reflect, maybe even to recognize their patterns. But growth is not your job to manage. You don't hold space indefinitely for someone to figure out whether they're ready to be who you need. Because love isn't just about what someone feels when you're gone. It's about what they choose to do with those feelings. Let them process. Let them sit with it. Let them wrestle with what your absence brings up in them. But don't put your life on pause waiting for them to turn that internal struggle into external action. If and when they're ready, they'll make it known. Not with hints or breadcrumbs, but with consistency, effort and presence. Until then, don't confuse emotional discomfort with emotional maturity. Missing you doesn't mean they're moving toward you. It might just mean they're sitting still in the dark. One of the most paradoxical things about someone with an avoidant attachment style is that the moment they start to miss you, really miss you, it can trigger them to pull back even more. Not because they didn't care, not because they're trying to hurt you, but because missing you reminds them of something they've spent their whole life trying not to feel need. To someone avoidant, needing another person often feels like a loss of control. It's not romantic. It's not inspiring, it's unsettling. It pokes at old fears that were likely built in childhood. Fears that say, if I rely on someone, I might get hurt. If I let someone in, they could leave. If I show my need, I might be rejected or feel trapped. So what do when they start to feel that need again? They retreat. They convince themselves they're better off keeping their distance. They push the feeling down, or they try to replace it with something more manageable, like distraction, or logic, or emotional numbness. When you're dealing with someone like this, it's incredibly confusing. You might sense that they miss you. You might even catch glimpses of it in their words, their eyes, or in the subtle ways they stay connected from afar, watching your stories, sending the occasional message, checking in just enough to let you know you're still on their mind. But the moment things start to feel emotionally charged or intimate again, they shut it down, they go quiet, they take a step back, and you're left wondering, what just happened? Didn't we have a moment? Didn't it matter? It probably did. But here's what you need to understand. They're not avoiding you. They're avoiding the feeling of needing you, because to them that feeling is tangled up with anxiety. It threatens their independence. It challenges their belief that self-reliance is the only safe way to live. So even though a part of them wants closeness, The moment it starts to feel too real, too necessary, they hit the brakes. And here's the catch: this doesn't mean they don't care. Often the more they care, the more threatening it feels. So they convince themselves that stepping away is the mature thing to do, or the safe thing, or even the kind thing. They're better off without me. But really it's just the only coping mechanism they've ever trusted: escape. This is why it's so important not to interpret their distance as a reflection of your worth. Because this isn't about your value, it's about their tolerance for emotional exposure. When someone fears that closeness equals losing themselves, even the healthiest love can start to feel like a threat. And the more deeply they feel for you, the more vulnerable they become. So paradoxically, missing you can make them retreat further, not closer. And let's be honest, this can mess with you here. Because your instinct might be to draw nearer when you sense them pulling away, to remind them that love doesn't have to mean losing freedom, that needing someone doesn't make them weak, that you're not trying to consume their life, you're just trying to connect. But no matter how gentle or grounded your love is, if they haven't done the inner work to reframe what intimacy means, they'll continue to confuse safety with distance. That's the tragedy of it. They think they're protecting themselves, but what they're actually doing is denying themselves a deeper experience of love. Because love isn't about losing independence, it's about expanding who you are by allowing someone in. It's not about control, it's about connection. But they don't always see it that way. So the moment they feel themselves leaning, the moment they realize they actually miss you, they panic. And instead of leaning into the longing, they run from it. They'll go silent, cold, detached. Not because they stopped feeling, but because feeling too much is overwhelming. It threatens their armor. So what do you do with that? You let them go, not with bitterness, not with resentment, but with clarity. You recognize that someone who runs from needing you is not ready to be with you. Because real love isn't about pretending you don't care. It's not about managing your emotions in secret. It's about meeting someone in the middle and saying, I miss you, and that's okay. I need you sometimes, and that's okay. I'm not weaker for it. I'm human. You can't teach someone that by shrinking yourself to fit their fears. You teach it by standing in your strength, by refusing to make yourself smaller just to feel close to someone who fears closeness. You hold space for love, but you don't chase after someone who believes that needing you is a threat. Because love that requires you to become invisible to feel safe is not love worth holding on to. One of the most important truths to accept when dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style is this: their silence is not always an invitation to wait. And yet so many people get stuck in that space. The space of almost, the space of maybe. The space where you convince yourself that if you just stay patient a little longer, just keep your heart open, just don't move on, they'll come back. That somehow their absence is a test of your loyalty, a quiet signal for you to prove how much you care. But the danger of that mindset is it traps you in emotional limbo. It puts your life on pause for someone who isn't pressing play. And here's the difficult part. Avoidants often want you to stay emotionally available, even when they're not offering the same in return. Not because they're malicious, but because they enjoy the comfort of knowing you're still there. That they haven't lost access to you completely. That you're orbiting even from a distance. There's a certain safety in that. For them, it allows them to feel connected without the pressure of commitment, to keep the door slightly open without actually walking through it. And for someone who fears emotional dependency, that middle ground feels like a perfect compromise. But for you, it's not connection, it's quiet erosion. It chips away at your confidence, at your clarity, at your sense of reality. You start questioning your instincts. You wonder if your standards are too high. You start rewriting the story so their absence feels noble instead of avoidant. And the more emotionally invested you are, the harder it is to pull yourself out of that headspace. Because you remember the connection, the spark, the moments that felt real. You know they felt something because it was mutual. But here's where you have to step back and ask yourself, even if they miss me, what are they doing about it? Because it's not just about what someone feels, it's about what they're willing to act on, what they're willing to build with you. It's easy to romanticize someone's silence, to project meaning onto it, to assume their stillness is sacred and full of thought, and sometimes it is. But thoughts without action mean nothing. You don't don't build a relationship in someone's mind. You build it in the real world, with effort, with communication, with presence. Avoidants can get stuck in that internal loop, where they feel something for you, but then quickly remind themselves of all the reasons why they shouldn't pursue it. The timing isn't right, they're not ready, it's too complicated. So they choose the comfort of emotional safety over the risk of emotional truth, and then you're left standing in a space they won't claim, but also won't close off. And the more you wait, the more it looks like consent, the more it teaches them that they can disappear without consequence, that they can stay in your life as a ghost, popping in when it suits them, disappearing when it doesn't, and you'll still be there, emotionally invested, emotionally available, emotionally waiting. That's not love. That's a holding pattern, and it's not fair to your heart. You have to be the one to break the spell, to decide that your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth is sacred, that your life is not a waiting room for someone else's fear to calm down, that your worth isn't measured by how long you can remain patient with someone who's unsure of what they want. Let them miss you. Let them sit with the discomfort of your absence, not as a punishment, but as a natural consequence of their own inaction. And if they truly want to reconnect, if they're capable of showing up in a real and consistent way, they will. But it has to come from, not from your hope, not from your waiting, not from your willingness to hold space for someone who hasn't claimed it. You have a right to move forward. You have a right to protect your peace, to stop waiting for someone who only shows up in their thoughts and not in your life. That's not cold, that's not unkind, that's clarity, that's self-respect, because the person who's right for you won't make you question whether your presence is enough to pull them closer. They'll recognize it, they'll choose it, and they'll meet you in the light, not hide in the shadows. There's a moment you reach, after all the silence, after the overthinking, after the emotional tug-of-war, where something inside you goes quiet, not in a numb or bitter way, but in a way that finally says enough. Not because you stopped caring, not because the connection wasn't real, but because you've finally seen the truth. That love, in its healthiest form, doesn't have to be this hard. It doesn't require constant decoding. It doesn't need you to keep chasing clarity. It's mutual, it's consistent. It shows up. The painful truth about avoidant people is that sometimes they only begin to confront their feelings when they feel your absence fully. Not when you're still there, emotionally available, not when you're lingering in the background, silently hoping they'll come around, but when you finally draw a line and stop offering access to someone who doesn't know what to do with it. There's a strange kind of wake-up call that happens when your silence replaces theirs, when the emotional cushion you've always provided is no longer there, when the space they once relied on to feel safe has been reclaimed by your boundaries. That's when they may finally start to feel the weight of your loss, not just miss you in a fleeting way, but feel you missing from their life. It's in that silence, yours, not theirs, that the real impact happens, because for so long, they've been able to convince themselves that you'll always be there, that they can take time, take space, take you for granted. And the moment that dynamic shifts, when you stop waiting, stop reaching, stop offering them a version of love that asks nothing in return, it disrupts that story. It forces them to confront the very thing they've been avoiding. What happens when the person who was always there isn't anymore? This is often when they start to reappear, sometimes subtly, sometimes with bold gestures, but not always because they've done the internal work, or because they're ready to love in the way you deserve. Sometimes it's just because they feel the discomfort of your absence and want relief. They want reassurance. They want to know the door is still open, not always because they plan to walk through it, but because they're afraid of it closing for good. That's where you have to be strong, because when someone comes back after pulling away, the easy thing to do is to let emotion lead, to give them another chance, just because you've missed them, to see their return as a sign of growth, rather than just discomfort. But growth isn't measured by someone's ability to miss you. It's measured by what they do with that pain. Whether it becomes fuel for change, or just another cycle. Missing you should change them, not just stir them. And if it doesn't, then your silence was never a mistake. It was a boundary, a message, a shift in energy that said, I love you but I love myself more. And here's the thing, when someone is truly ready, when they've reached a point where they no longer want to run from connection, they'll come back differently. They won't breadcrumb, they won't show up with vague apologies or half efforts. They'll bring clarity, they'll bring consistency, they'll take ownership, and they'll match the energy you gave without you having to beg for it. But you'll only know if that's real, if you're willing to give them the space to rise or fall without your emotional presence holding them up. That's the paradox of real love. It sometimes requires distance to reveal depth. Not all distance leads to reconnection, but the right kind of distance, grounded in self-respect, and not punishment, reveals who's capable of meeting you, and if they don't, if your silence only highlights their unwillingness or inability to grow, then you've still won, because you've stopped leaking love in places that don't pour it back. You've stopped editing yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. You've reclaimed your time, your energy, your worth. And that version of you, the one who chooses peace over potential, clarity over confusion, standards over hope, that version doesn't chase. That version attracts. That version draws in someone who doesn't need distance to feel safe, but closeness to feel alive. That's who you wait for, if you're going to wait at all. Because the one who's meant for you won't need to lose you to realize your value. They'll see it while you're still there, and they'll never make you question if showing up is something you have to earn.